Hello and welcome. We're talking tonight about a really interesting and important topic about maintaining long-term relationships. My guest is Tai Mendenhall, who is an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota in Family Social Sciences. And he's a very beloved teacher. I read that you got the Rising Star Award from the College of Human Ecology a few years ago.
Oh, I love to teach. I think it's my favorite thing in the whole part of the job.
And you said to me just a few minutes ago that you actually were born in New Zealand.
Yeah, which sounds really neat to say, but we moved to the United States when I was too young to really remember it, but I do have double citizenship, and my name being T-A-I is always a fun thing to talk about.
Right, gets people intrigued, doesn't it?
It certainly does. They're like, huh, you don't look like or talk like or act like anything I expected when I first saw your name on paper.
Although New Zealand people are known to have a great sense of humor, and just visiting with you a little bit before the show,
and beautiful accents, and I wish I had it.
The accents are great. Well, this topic is, as I said to the viewers, one that I think everyone is interested in. Whether you're someone who's not been successful at long-term relationships, or you're in one and you want to hang on and keep it going.
Well, we see that at the university with the course that we teach called Intimate Relationships, because in different majors, a lot of times people will only take classes in their major, but in the Intimate Relationships class, we have like 70, 75 different majors that come and take that class.
Really?
Because if you're in physics or engineering or family social science or psychology or medicine, you're either in or you want to be in an intimate relationship.
Right.
And so much of our media pays attention to the initial courtship. How do we get together? How do we get the good date? But then people want to know, well, how do I keep them? How do I make the relationship
and that's
last?
the hard part.
Yeah, and not only how do I make the relationship not, divorce or break up, but how do I continue to grow and evolve in this relationship and not just stay together at some kind of baseline that maybe isn't as satisfying? Because, when you're together with somebody for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you can still be growing and it can still be getting even more exciting every day if you do it on purpose. And that's what students are really engaged with and want to know more about.
Want some secrets from you, Tai?
Absolutely.
Yes, to just stay together for the sake of staying together is not anyone's goal.
No.
When they go into a relationship.
No, and there was
People
a lot of
do it, but
they do, and there was a lot of research over the last maybe 20 or 30 years that's followed couples over time, and we used to recognize this thing called the curvilinear satisfaction curve, where couples really from the day they got married would get less and less happy over time and wouldn't start getting happy again until the kids had left and they were in their later years and they were retiring and maybe life was getting comparatively simple. And there's been a lot of attention to not, or to how to not do that, and we're starting to see couples not do that anymore, that couples are able to stay happy really throughout their time together, through their life together, and again, even get better all the time.
I did see a study not too long ago that said that the hardest years for most couples were the years when the children were really young. Would you concur with that?
The two most vulnerable times for couples in terms of divorce, if you're looking at that as your indicator of whether or not the relationship is successful, are during the first year or two of marriage and usually about 18 to 20 years out. And as we coincide that with most folks, if they follow the path that most people do in terms of getting married in their 20s or early 30s now and having children relatively soon after, that is part of why that's such a vulnerable period. We don't want to blame it on kids. I mean, it's not that simple. There's an awful lot of kind of after prom effect when we spend an entire year and $20,000 paying for a single day party for a wedding. And a lot of times couples are living together for the first time or they're going into married life. It's a tough time. I mean, you're figuring out how to be a married couple. And
a lot of negotiating.
Oh, you bet. I mean, down to how do we spend money, to how do we decorate the house, how do we do all of this stuff. And when you throw kids in there, it's even more complicated.
I say a lot of negotiating, but a lot of couples, I think, don't know how to negotiate. So maybe one decides to be the giver-inner and the other becomes more the dominant person.
That can be a pattern that starts a long time before marriage, too.
A pattern that is tricky to get out of and it's not healthy when you're in it, right?
It's one of, yeah, and it's one of the reasons why oftentimes the best time to do couples counseling or to figure out how to solve problems together is before you're married or before there's a whole lot of problems. And couples tend to be the most motivated to go to therapy. That's why premarital therapy is such a good predictor of marriage stability later on, because nobody's in trouble yet. You know, when we want to get married and we're excited and we're willing to talk about this stuff, or because we haven't really settled into some of these patterns yet, they're easier to negotiate and figure out together as a team versus having a win-lose type of conflict situation years down the road.
Do many couples do the premarital therapy in a fairly serious way, Tai?
I think that it really depends. Most churches, most places that you know, will do marriage in some way, shape, or form, and for most of us that's some kind of religious context, will voluntarily mandate, if that makes sense, that couples go through some kind of premarital counseling. And some of it, frankly, is jumping a hoop. They want to get married, and so they're going to check that off the list, and they don't really take it seriously. Other couples really roll up their sleeves and take it seriously, and they look at what we call strengths, which is kind of an obvious thing to call it, and what we call growth areas, which can be certainly weaknesses with a couple. But before you live together, before you have kids, before you buy your first house or your first car, you know, before you've really run into a lot of the things that can cause problems down the road, you start talking about it beforehand. And it's always easier to prepare than it is to repair. And so the couples that do take it seriously, usually the payoff is not only a more stable relationship, but a happier one over time.
You've mentioned living together, which is very, very common now. Do you think the statistics are such that living together is much, much riskier than getting married in terms of staying together?
Oh, I don't.
You don't?
No, I
Okay.
don't. I think that years ago, cohabitation, as it was starting to become more common, was getting a lot of pushback because it went against a lot of conventional or traditional beliefs, usually connected to some type of religion, that was not to be done, that you needed to get married before you would live together. Now, most couples actually live together before they get married, and a lot of couples are choosing not to get married. And that could be people that have been divorced and, you know, we're committed, we're in love, why bother? You know, we don't need to go through, you know, a ceremony for our family or for the church or for the state to prove that. But then also, I think that the social acceptance of cohabitation just in general is high enough that because most couples are doing it, we're not finding it to be a very big predictor of whether or how the couple is going to work out over time.
That's interesting.
I would say that couples that are likely to cohabitate, in comparison to couples that aren't, tend to be more liberal anyway. And so if there is a problem in the relationship that's not solvable later on, they would be more likely to divorce, not because they cohabitated, but because they're more liberal anyway. Whereas couples that very strictly would not want to cohabitate for their belief systems or their faith or their community might choose to stay together to you know, hash it out, or even to stay together unhappy because divorce is just seen as something that's that's very bad.
A stigma kind of a thing. But then couples who live together and never intend to get married, are their statistics equally good too now to the couple who does marry?
I think that the research on that is in its infancy. The couples that choose to live together forever without marriage are still relatively uncommon, because most people in the United States at least do get married. And so if you ask me that question in about 10 more years, we might have a better sense.
Well, I'll have you back.
Well, thank you. I think that my clinical take on it is that there might be a more strong likelihood to stay together if you're married because of the profound nature of that type of commitment. Couples oftentimes that cohabitate, even without a whole lot of plans to get married, according to the research so far, show that eventually they do.
Interesting. Children, I want to talk some about having one child, having no children, having more than one. I read some research that said that one child doesn't put a great strain on a marriage, but after the second child, the relationship is much more at risk for problems because of the demands of having 2 children. Is that
I-
anything
I-
that ties in
I'm-
with your research or
I
knowledge?
think that certainly different research is going to come up with different findings depending on who your sample is, how old your
Sure.
sample is, where your sample is from. I would say that, I'm not familiar with the research that you read, but the majority of the research that's out there would actually disagree with that. Saying that when the 2 of the couple become 3, that's when the biggest hit happens, because you're not a
With
couple
that
anymore.
first child.
That's right. You're not a
Okay.
couple anymore. You're 3 people, and
You can't just take off and run to the movies.
that's right. You can't. And the primacy of this couple, that your relationship, your husband, your wife, is the first thing on your to-do list. Not so much anymore. And anybody that's had babies knows. I mean, you're exhausted. You're not sleeping. Your whole schedule and your spontaneity is gone. And most research shows that couples before having their first child, compared to the same couples after they've had their first child, spend about a third of the amount of time together. I mean, as a couple.
Well, say that again. I need to hear it one more time.
That if you take couples that don't have any children yet and look at how much time they spend together as a couple, quality time, date nights,
Right.
taking vacations together, or even just quiet nights at home, connecting with each other, not passively watching TV, but being a couple. And you compare that to after they've had a child, they're down to about a third of the amount of time. And that's not because they don't love each other anymore, it's because babies are a lot of work.
All the details and
That's right.
necessities. Yeah.
And because they haven't been parents yet, first children oftentimes are more stressful. You'll oftentimes hear couples say, well, our first child was the tough child, and our second child was so easy. And they forget that it was the first time they were parents, and by the time they had the second child, they had been there, done that. They were better at picking their battles. They knew how to do that routine. So I would actually say it's the first child that's the toughest on most marriages.
What about then child number 3, 4? I mean, we don't have a lot of families having big families anymore, but does it get harder as you have more children in general, or would you say after you've gotten the adjustment of being parents, you can add 1 or 2 without great
Well,
change?
if we're focusing on the couple, I think that the more children you have, the harder it's going to be to maintain
To be a couple.
the relationship as a couple. And again, that's just because of the amount of hours in the day. I mean, kids, again, they require a lot of time, a lot of attention, and everything that means. And so really, couples need to do their relationship on purpose even more when they have kids. And I think couples can get sloppy over time without kids, and if they start taking each other for granted and not doing their relationship on purpose. But once you have child number 1, absolutely. Once you have child number 2 or 3, it really becomes essential. Or you wind up being that statistic 18 or 20, 22 years out, where couples get really vulnerable to divorce again, because you're looking across the table at somebody you don't know.
So that 18 to 20 year period is when the kids have gone back or gone to college and you're back.
That's right.
as
And
a
if the marriage has
couple
been
again.
revolving around childcare, revolving around running kids to soccer, revolving around everything and anything that has to do with the family, but not the 2-person unit that brought the family together, then again, when the kids leave, you don't have anything going for you anymore in terms of a couple.
That
You're
makes
not running
sense.
around. You don't have kids anymore.
We only have 10 minutes left. That's hard to
Oh, it
believe.
does go by fast. doesn't it?
I want to run several questions by you.
Sure.
And maybe just get a short answer so I can sort of pick your brain on several things here. Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist, wrote about serial monogamy years ago. And I know it's practiced in other cultures frequently. We maybe have that here to some degree. Do you see a trend that way, where you have several
Yeah, I think serial monogamy has been with us for quite some time, and if anything, I think it's becoming more common in Western culture, in large part because people are living longer. The stigma of divorce is down. If relationships ultimately don't work out, people feel more able to leave them. And then they don't, and even in 50, 60, even 70 years old, they don't want to sign up to be alone. And so they find another partner and they try it again. Again, everybody's either in or wants to be in an intimate relationship, and most of us don't want the one-night stand. Most of us want that to last for a long time. So when a relationship doesn't work, we try again.
I have to ask, are you married?
I am divorced, but I'm
Okay.
currently dating a wonderful woman. Her name is Ling, so stay tuned.
Practicing all these
That's
good.
right, that's right. Practice what you preach.
Another question on my list is about infidelity. Statistics are fairly high in terms of, what is it now, 50% of men have a affair outside marriage, about the same amount for women, or
Yeah,
same number.
this is another issue that the statistics really do vary. One of the things that we're finding with new research is that women commit infidelity a lot too, and I think that the stereotype has always been it's the man.
Yeah.
Men are still coming in with the statistics at a higher rate, but it is unfortunately a very common deal. The research also is really mixed on whether or not or how the couple can survive infidelity. You'll read some statistics that say that most couples that have had an affair ultimately won't make it. They could forgive, but they're not going to forget, and that's always going to be hanging around in terms of their, in terms of the atmosphere and the environment of that couple, which obviously isn't going to feel good. But there's also a lot of research that shows that couples can survive it. In my clinical experience, I've seen more couples survive it than couples that don't. I think infidelity oftentimes is a symptom of a problem in the relationship, and if it can get everybody's attention, and obviously it does in a way that couples are willing to roll up their sleeves and work at some of the things that might have led up to that. Not that the person that committed it is off the hook, but couples can come out of it even stronger.
So if you're in a relationship, if someone's listening and you are having a relationship on the side, and you aren't working on your relationship, that does not bode well on your primary
it doesn't.
relationship.
Oftentimes in that
That's
Oftentimes
when
in that
things get-
situation, it's because there was a problem in the relationship, so somebody sees a greener pasture. And it's easy to romanticize a third person as being so much better and so much fill in the blank that your spouse isn't. And oftentimes that romanticized image can perpetuate the affair with couples that ultimately do break up, or people that were having an affair with somebody and then they tried to have an official long-term relationship with that person. The statistics regarding those couples are actually pretty poor.
Would you advise, Dr. Mendenhall, that if someone is having an affair but does want to work on the relationship, that they end the affair, cut it right off, and get to working on the relationship?
Absolutely.
I mean, that sounds like the
it's
advice
actually,
you would give, but that's hard for people to do.
It is, but it's essential. And if you look at a lot of the research on clinical work with couples that are dealing with infidelity, that's the first place that therapists will push couples to go, is that you need to stop that affair, you need to get really vocal, it's done, no more communication, and you're going to focus on the relationship proper.
And if working on the relationship seriously doesn't work, then maybe you have the option of going back to that.
Well, I suppose you
person.
do, but again, the statistics on that situation,
Aren't good, are
because that
they?
person you've been cheating is oftentimes romanticized, you'll find out that they're not so great in real life once you try.
Totally free and
Yeah. And a
And
lot of
there's
times there can
also
be a
the-
regret going, oh, I probably shouldn't have done it that way.
there's also the tainting, so to speak. It's a funny word, but the tainting of the relationship, perhaps because of all the struggles.
Yeah, I
and
would
all
argue
the
that any relationship
deception
that's built on that kind of foundation is going to be pretty shaky.
is going to be tricky to take off and really fly with.
That's right. At least that's what we've seen.
Are there periods in a marriage or a long-term relationship where affairs are more likely to occur?
I think that if you look at when affairs are more likely to occur, it's when the couple is the most stressed. And so if you look at that first year, if you look 18 to 20 years out, Those would be common times. But anytime there's big transitions, there's a change in job, somebody's going back to school, a kid is sick, there's financial stress, an elderly parent is passing away. All of those times can be very vulnerable times when that person that will listen to you, and that person will connect with you and talk with you like nobody else can. In other words, romanticizing this, and that could be somebody at work or somebody that you've met online or something. It can be a slippery slope really quick. When everything's going well in the couple, there really isn't any reason to look outside of the couple, and so we don't usually see affairs happen during the good times.
That makes sense. I ran these questions by some people before I firmed them up, and one of the people that I talked with said, ask him, make this a priority to ask him about how honest you should be in a relationship that's a long-term one.
Oh, that's always a good question.
It's a good question. It's a hard question, I think, isn't it? I
Well,
mean, do you tell everything that's on your soul and, then risk hurting the person, perhaps?
I think that in terms of communication, honesty is essential, but you don't always have to communicate about everything. And let's see if I can make that make sense. If somebody makes you a dinner because they know that you've had a really crazy week and it's the end of the week and they make this wonderful dinner for you and they put a lot of time in that and it doesn't taste good. You probably shouldn't be so honest about that because the point is they made you dinner and we're doing something to connect with you about that.
So think of the intent.
Exactly, think of the intent. Or if somebody is worried about imperfections, they're looking in the mirror and say, do I look like I'm gaining weight? Or, is my hair falling out or whatever? Do I look bad now? And you're not going to help by saying, oh yeah, you've totally gained all this weight or, whatever. And
I don't find you as attractive.
I don't find you as attractive. No, I think that honesty is the best policy most of the time, but when it does hurt somebody or when it has nothing to do with really the relationship itself, I don't think that you need to offer everything.
So when do you offer honesty then? I mean, I think I understand what you're saying, but if you're worried about something in terms of your relationship,
I think that there's a couple of ways to answer that. Obviously, when there's a problem, I think that it's important to be honest, to say, you know what, I'm hurting here, I'm worried here, this is troubling to me, this is important to me, and to talk about that. But that's the easy place to go. I think the place where most of us miss it, and this is connected to relationships, oftentimes feeling like they're losing their spark over time, or that they're on automatic pilot but they're not super happy, is that we need to be honest and always talk about the good things, because most of us don't after courtship. To stop in the middle of the mall and say, my God, you look so beautiful today, or to give each other a phone call in the middle of the day and saying, no reason, I just wanted to tell you that I love you. Because otherwise we say I love you when we're hanging up the phone, or we say I love you in the birthday card, or on their deathbed, and not when it's important. This means so much to me that we have dinner together every night. I love our dates, and it was so crazy all week long, figuring out the babysitter and whatever, and I was stressed about this, but here we are, and this is awesome. I love spending time with you. Being honest about that, because oftentimes we're thinking it and we're feeling it, but we don't say it, and I think that's
share
essential
the good
to
stuff.
say it. Yeah, because we'll talk about it something when we're upset, but we don't talk about something when everything's great. And we need to.
I really get what you're saying about don't criticize the meal, don't make the person feel bad. But what about something, and this is, I think, common, tricky, like, oh, you were really flirting, weren't you, with that neighbor woman at the party we had, or something where you're being vulnerable, but also being perhaps viewed as critical.
Well, I think in
that's where honesty, I think, can be hard to
I think it can
work out.
I think if you're being honest about what's going on for you, then it can feel less attacking to the partner, because the partner might not have realized that it looked like they were being flirtatious. They might not have even realized that they were being flirtatious. Maybe they were just having a good time. So there's a difference that you're going to get on the receiving end if you say, well, you were really flirting with that person at the party, because already I'm guilty of it. Or versus, I'm feeling kind of anxious here because it really seemed like you we're talking and talking and maybe even flirting, and I'm not feeling safe or stable or secure about that. Then it's about you, and it offers the space to have a conversation about it, instead of the next thing that your partner says has to be some kind of defense, saying, oh, I wasn't flirting, or, you know, that's the wrong way to start the conversation. If it's, I'm sorry that you felt insecure, I didn't mean to hurt you, that's oftentimes a much easier place to get if you own it first.
I like that. So sharing your feelings rather than criticizing the other person's behavior.
That's right, because you don't know what's going on in your partner's brain. I mean, you can't read their mind, but you know what's going on with the person that you're with 24 hours a day. So if you start there, then your partner can join you where you're at.
Well, all of these topics, as you and I said, we could talk for hours about each one of them. They're just very interesting and common issues, I think. Do we have a page that we're going to put up on the screen? We do, don't we? Okay, you brought a book. Good.
I brought a couple of books. You know, I was going through, and just in terms of books that are easy to read and empirically supported. I think some of the work by John Gottman is great. Gary Chapman's work with the love languages has, it's a completely different take, completely different group of literature, and I think that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. It's really accessible and very fun to read, and fun to read as a couple.
Well, those are great suggestions. Thank you so much for bringing those down.
Oh, you bet.
We have maybe 1 minute left, and I just want to see if there's any tip that we haven't touched on or alluded to that you could give a couple who's saying, oh, just one more wise nugget from you, Tai.
Well, I've said this before, but do your relationship on purpose. I mean, when you first met, when you're in courtship, you're thinking about each other, you're doing things for each other, you're planning your time together, and you're very purposeful about what you're saying, what you're thinking, what you're not doing, just as much as what you're doing. And that's where we feel that excitement and that spark. And then later on, once we got them, we start taking each other for granted and getting sloppy. And I don't think that we should do that. I think that we have to do our relationships on purpose, because if we do, we can notice that we don't follow that decline that so many times couples do.
There is that very fine line you cross over, and it's real hard to pull back. So.
Oh yeah, I remember my grandparents were holding hands when they were 70, 80 years old in the mall, and it was beautiful, and people thought it was cute. It wasn't cute. It was a couple that was doing their relationship on purpose.
On purpose. Remember that, on purpose. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been great.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us. I'll see you next time. Until then, have a good week.